You're looking at an Australian beach, 1975. Almost nobody on it is overweight. They weren't dieting, they weren't counting calories. Most had never seen the inside of a gym. Back then, 1 in 10 Australian adults was obese. Today, it's 1 in 3. Australians didn't suddenly lose their willpower, they lost the environment that made willpower unnecessary. And what dismantled it wasn't one thing, it was everything, changing at once. Archival footage from the 1970s captures a world that now feels almost foreign. Streets, beaches, and schoolyards are filled with lean bodies, adults and children alike. In 1975, national health data recorded just 4 to 5% of Australian adults as obese. Even when the figure is rounded up by contemporary accounts, it barely reaches 10%. Fast forward to today, and official surveys put that number above 31%. The mean body mass index for men in the mid-1970s was 23.6. For women, 24.0. Both well below the national averages that now hover close to 28. This isn't just a story of numbers. It's there in the old family photos. The narrow plates on the dinner table, the modest slice of pavlova, the single bottle of soft drink shared between siblings. The world was built for restraint, not indulgence. The average Australian consumed about 40 kilograms of added sugar a year in the early 1970s. Today, that figure has climbed to over 60 kilograms per person. Portion sizes have swelled too. A standard chip bag once weighed 30 grams, now it's closer to 50. Dinner plates grew from 9 inches to 12, quietly inviting more food onto the table. Professor John Dixon, who has spent decades tracing the rise of obesity in Australia, points out that these changes did not unfold overnight. They crept in, year by year, reshaping the food environment and daily life. But the visual record is unambiguous. In crowd scenes from 1975, overweight bodies are rare enough to stand out. By 2022, they are the norm. The question that haunts these images isn't about willpower. It's about what changed in the Australian day-to-day, what rewired the routines, the kitchen cupboards, the dinner plates, and the streets themselves. If the 1970s made slimness effortless, the decades that followed quietly dismantled that world piece by piece. Dinner in a 1970s Australian home followed a script so familiar it hardly needed to be spoken aloud. At 6 o'clock, the kitchen filled with the smells of onions frying or a roast slowly crisping in the oven. A mother, sometimes a grandmother, occasionally a father, stood at the stove, moving through a routine learned from her own parents. There was no debate about what came next. Plates were set, everyone took their place, and a home-cooked meal arrived on the table. Stews, chops, meat and 3 veg, or a Sunday roast stretched into sandwiches for Monday and soup by Tuesday. The week's shopping list was short, 15 items give or take. Bread, milk, potatoes, carrots, mince, a tin of fruit, maybe a block of cheese. Supermarkets carried fewer brands and the trolley rarely filled with snacks or ready-made meals. Surveys in women's magazines from the era found that more than 9 out of 10 families ate a cooked dinner at home every night. Takeaway was for special occasions, fish and chips on a Friday, or Chinese once a month if you lived near a big enough town. After dessert, the kitchen closed, literally and figuratively. Cupboards were shut, benches wiped down, and the fridge door stayed closed until breakfast. The idea of standing in front of an open fridge after dark, searching for something sweet, was as foreign as microwaving a meal. There were no nightly snacks, no late-night bowls of cereal, no grazing through television ads. If you were hungry before bed, you waited for morning. Portions were modest, not by heroic restraint, but because that's what was served. Plates were smaller, 9 inches across, and seconds were rare. Soft drink was rationed, a single bottle split among siblings, and lollies belonged to Saturday afternoons at the corner shop. The rhythm of eating was set by the household, not by marketing or convenience. The kitchen was the centre of family life, but it was also a place of boundaries. When dinner ended, so did eating. The structure of the day itself made overindulgence almost impossible. In that world, willpower was a footnote. The rules were written into the routine, and everyone followed them without thinking twice. A quiet transformation began in the late 1970s, hiding in plain sight on every family table and corner shop shelf. Standard dinner plates, once just 22 centimeters across, crept up to 27 centimeters by the 1990s. That extra 5 centimeters may sound trivial, but it meant each plate could hold nearly 40% more food. Without anyone deciding to eat more, the simple act of serving dinner now delivered extra calories night after night. Dr. Carolyn Fogarty, a historian of Australian food habits, traces this shift through supermarket catalogues and kitchenware ads. She points to the steady upsizing of everyday items, chip packets that grew from 30 grams to 45 grams, soft drink bottles that doubled from 250 millilitres to 500. A single meal could now pack in 800 to 1,200 extra kilojoules compared to the 1970s, even if the recipes stayed the same. For a family of 4, that meant thousands of surplus kilojoules a week, simply by following the new normal. The change was subtle. Nobody announced bigger plates on the nightly news. There were no headlines about chip bags swelling by half, or soft drink bottles stretching to twice their old size. But the effect was cumulative and relentless. Serving spoons followed the plates, dessert bowls grew, and the once standard glass of cordial was replaced by a tumbler that could hold half a litre. Portion sizes at home and in takeaways crept up in lockstep, each reinforcing the other. Dr. Fogarty's research shows how these small increments added up. Even if families still cooked the same meat and 3 veg, the larger plates and bowls encouraged second helpings and larger first serves. The maths is simple but unforgiving. An extra 1,000 kilojoules per day, repeated over months and years, translates to steady weight gain for most people. No one had to overeat on purpose. The environment made it automatic. This was the beginning of calorie creep, an invisible force that rewrote the rules of eating in Australia. The world that once made restraint effortless was quietly dismantled, replaced by a new logic: more space, more food, more often. And for most Australians, it happened without a single conscious decision. 3 meals a day, every day. This was the unspoken rule in the 1970s in Australia. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, each had its time and place, and in between there was nothing. The kitchen clock set the rhythm, not hunger pangs or advertising jingles. At school, a teacher might recall the quiet shuffle of lunchboxes opening at midday, each one packed at home. A sandwich, a piece of fruit, maybe a homemade biscuit if you were lucky. There were no vending machines humming in the corridor, no canteen windows selling chips before the bell. Snack time simply did not exist. Retail data from the era tells the same story. Less than 2% of household food spending went to snacks. The rest was spent on ingredients for real meals. Supermarkets, still small by today's standards, offered little in the way of ready-to-eat treats. The shelves held flour, sugar, tea, and tinned fruit, not rows of chocolate bars or single-serve packets. If you wanted a snack, you waited for Saturday, when pocket money could buy a bag of mixed lollies from the corner milk bar. Even then, it was a treat, not a habit. The discipline of the 3-meal day wasn't about self-denial, it was about structure. Lunch happened in the schoolyard, dinner at the kitchen table, breakfast before the bus. Outside those windows, eating was simply not an option. Teachers remember reminding students to finish their sandwiches, knowing there would be nothing until dinner. At home, parents closed the kitchen after the evening meal. Fridges stayed shut, cupboards were off limits. If you felt hungry after dinner, you went to bed and waited for morning. Time use surveys from the period show how this routine kept total calorie intake in check. Without snacks to fill the gaps, each meal had to last. There was no grazing, no handfuls of chips during television, no soft drink before bed. The day's energy was divided into 3 set portions, and the hours in between were filled with movement, walking to school, playing outside, helping with chores. The world was not engineered for constant eating. It was built for intervals, for hunger to rise and fall with the sun. In that environment, restraint was woven into the fabric of daily life. There was simply less food, less often, and the body adapted to the rhythm. Walking was stitched into daily life in 1970s Australia. Nearly half of working adults made their commute on foot or by bicycle, rain or shine. Public transport meant another walk at each end, while cars, still a luxury for many, were reserved for special trips. The school run was a parade of kids on foot, bikes rattling over footpaths, lunchboxes swinging. At home, movement didn't stop. Time use surveys from the era record about 2 hours a day of moderate to vigorous activity outside formal work. For children, 3 hours of outdoor play was routine: cricket in the street, hide and seek in backyards, laps at the local pool. The television sat silent until evening, and the living room was empty until the sun went down. Household chores demanded effort. Mowing the lawn meant pushing a heavy rotary mower, not guiding a motorised one. Laundry was carried out to the Hills hoist, pegged piece by piece and hauled back inside. Shopping was a walk to the local grocer, not a drive to a megastore. Even leisure was active: bushwalks on weekends, surf lifesaving at the beach, backyard gardening that left hands dirty and muscles tired. Professor Kate McNally, who has spent years tracing these patterns, describes a society where energy out was simply part of the day. There were no gym memberships or step counters, just a world that kept people moving by default. The contrast to later decades is stark. As cars, screens, and labour-saving devices took hold, the natural calorie burn of daily life faded. In 1970s, the environment delivered movement without a second thought. It was the silent partner in keeping Australia slim. A quiet revolution unfolded in the Australian pantry and supermarket aisle from the late 1970s through the 1990s, a revolution made of sugar. The numbers tell the story. In the early 1970s, the average Australian consumed about 40 kilograms of added sugar each year. By the early 2000s, that figure had climbed above 60 kilograms per person. It wasn't just that people were eating more dessert. Sugar began slipping into foods that had never been sweet before: breakfast cereals, muesli bars, even savoury sauces. The arrival of high fructose corn syrup, first allowed in Australian foods in 1981, accelerated the shift. Imports of HFCS rose from almost nothing to 150,000 tonnes by the mid-1990s, quietly sweetening soft drinks, baked goods, and ready-made snacks. An analyst from the Office of Health Promotion later traced these changes through national nutrition surveys and trade records. In 1975, added sugars made up about 10% of the average adult's total energy intake. By the mid-1990s, that share had reached 15%. The difference sounds small, but it meant thousands of extra calories over the course of a year. Calories that were largely invisible, hidden in foods that didn't taste especially sweet. Supermarket shelves expanded, and so did the range of products laced with sugar or syrup. What had once been an occasional treat became a daily habit, often without a second thought. The story of Australia's sugar shift isn't about a sudden craving for sweetness. It's about an environment that changed quietly, steadily, and all at once. As the 1980s approached, the country stood at a nutritional tipping point, with the quiet flood of hidden sugars setting the stage for the fast food boom and the rise of convenience eating that would soon follow. Fast food in the 1970s Australia was a novelty, not a habit. In 1975, McDonald's counted just 8 outlets across the country. By 1990, that number had soared to 152, with KFC and Pizza Hut racing to keep pace. The Golden Arches, once a rare sight on a family road trip, became a fixture in suburb after suburb. The numbers on household spending tell the same story. In the mid-1970s, only about 3% of the average family's food budget went to takeaway. By the mid-1990s, it was 12%, a fourfold jump in just 2 decades. A former McDonald's franchisee remembers those early years as a whirlwind. He talks about queues out the door on Friday nights, kids in footy jumpers clutching their first Happy Meals, and parents marvelling at the speed of it all. "We went from being a treat to being dinner," he recalls. "People started coming in 3-4 nights a week. It wasn't special anymore. It was just easy." The industry's advertising budget exploded to match its ambitions. By the late 1980s, Fast food brands were spending more than $30 million a year on television spots, beaming images of burgers and chips into living rooms during prime time. The message was clear. Convenience was king, and home cooking was no longer the only answer. As the outlets multiplied and the ads grew louder, the quiet routines of the Australian kitchen began to give way to a new normal, one where dinner could be bought in a paper bag any night of the week. By the late 1980s, the structure of daily life in Australia had shifted. Paid work among women rose from 56% to 71%, upending routines that once anchored family meals. Dinner, once a home ritual, now bent around shift work and commutes. A former fast food manager recalls, "We started seeing the same faces, not just on Fridays, but all week. Dinner wasn't at home anymore, it was here, and it was fast." Convenience foods replaced slow-cooked meals, and takeaway became a staple, not a treat. Television's hold deepened. Weekly viewing climbed from 12 to 19 hours, pulling families into longer evenings in front of the screen. Snack ads followed, their budgets swelling from $5 million to $30 million. The message was constant. Eating could happen anywhere, anytime. Supermarkets too were reshaped. Shelf space for processed snacks jumped from 5% to 22%. The number of products, SKUs, more than doubled, from 350 to 800. Shopping became a test of will, with aisles lined with cereals, biscuits, and ready-to-eat packs. Snack packs, once rare, became routine. Lunches moved from lunchboxes to canteens, then to the drive-thru. With more money, more options, and less time, the boundaries around eating dissolved. The environment, not willpower, tipped the scales. For the first time, ordinary Australians could eat more than their bodies could quietly burn. The effortless slimness of the past faded, replaced by a system where restraint was the exception. Today, 3 times as many Australian adults struggle with obesity as in the 1970s, not because they changed, but because the world around them did. The shift from home-cooked routines and active streets to endless options and constant convenience wasn't just cultural, it was structural. The challenge now isn't willpower, it's rebuilding an environment where healthy choices come naturally. The past isn't lost, but it won't return by accident.